She stole millions, then silenced the only man who knew. In 2016, investors across 3 countries watched their savings vanish overnight. Retirees, young professionals, even small business owners. More than $120 million disappeared from a private investment firm that promised safe, steady returns. At first, authorities believed it was just another case of financial fraud, an elaborate Ponzi scheme run by a charismatic executive who had fooled everyone. But 6 weeks later, a body was found in a luxury apartment. And suddenly, the investigation took a much darker turn, because the architect of the fraud wasn't a man whose name was on the paperwork. It was a woman no one suspected. Her name was Clara Voss, and by the time police understood who she really was, it was already too late. The perfect image. Clara Voss was the kind of person people trusted instantly. She was soft-spoken, impeccably dressed, and always prepared. In boardrooms, she rarely raised her voice. She didn't need to. When Clara spoke, people listened. At 34 years old, she was the chief financial officer of North Star Capital, a private investment firm headquartered in London, with satellite offices in Singapore and Toronto. On paper, North Star specialized in low-risk wealth management, bond portfolios, conservative equities, and international real estate funds. It marketed itself as a safe alternative in an unpredictable financial world, and Clara was its backbone, while the CEO, Martin Hale, handled interviews and investor dinners. Clara handled the numbers. She controlled the accounts, the audits, and the internal reports. Regulators saw her as disciplined. Employees saw her as brilliant. What no one realized was that Clara had been planning something far bigger than a career. She was planning an exit. The scheme beneath the surface. North Star Capital was profitable, but not nearly as profitable as it appeared. Behind the scenes, Clara had quietly created a parallel system of accounts. She used shell companies registered in offshore jurisdictions, each one designed to look like a legitimate investment vehicle. Money flowed in cleanly. Money flowed out invisibly. At first, she moved small amounts, testing systems, watching for alarms that never came. Then the transfers grew larger. Quarterly reports were altered. Losses were hidden inside complex financial instruments that most investors didn't understand. When returns were due, Clara used new investor money to pay old investors. Classic Ponzi mechanics. But this one was different. Clara wasn't reckless. She didn't live extravagantly. She didn't buy sports cars or post luxury photos online. Every dollar she took was carefully stored, layered, and redistributed across accounts that couldn't easily be traced. For nearly 4 years, it worked flawlessly, until Martin Hale started asking questions. The man who knew too much. Martin Hale wasn't a financial expert. That was why Clara had been hired. But in early 2016, he noticed something strange. An audit report didn't match the internal cash flow projections. A minor discrepancy, but enough to bother him. When he asked Clara about it, she smiled and explained away as a timing issue. He accepted the answer, at first, but then it happened again. And again, Martin began requesting deeper access to the books. He hired an external consultant, someone Clara didn't choose. That was the moment Clara realized the timeline had changed. If Martin uncovered the truth, the firm would collapse. Regulators would step in, and the trail would eventually lead straight to her. So Clara did what she always did. She calculated, a controlled descent. In the weeks that followed, Clara accelerated her withdrawals. Larger sums moved offshore. Digital records were subtly altered. Backups were overwritten. At the same time, she planted evidence. Emails that made it appear as though Martin Hale had authorized risky investments. Documents that suggested he had pressured staff to falsify numbers. Even a draft resignation letter, never sent, but saved on his computer. To investigators, it would look like Martin was panicking. All Clara needed was time. But Martin wasn't slowing down. He told a colleague he planned to meet regulators within the month. He even hinted that he might go public if necessary. That was when Clara made her final decision. The night everything changed. On a quiet Thursday evening, Martin Hale returned to his apartment after work. Security footage showed him entering alone. No forced entry was recorded. No neighbors heard a struggle. The next morning, Martin was found unresponsive inside his home. Authorities initially believed it was a medical emergency. There were no obvious signs of violence, no disturbance, no broken items. But something didn't feel right. Martin was 46 years old, healthy, no history of serious illness. A closer investigation began. The financial collapse. Before the cause of Martin's death was publicly announced, North Star Capital imploded. Investors panicked. Withdrawal requests flooded in. And when the firm couldn't meet them, regulators froze the accounts. That's when the fraud became undeniable. Millions were missing, then tens of millions, then over $100 million. News headlines blamed Martin Hale. His name was everywhere. A disgraced CEO, a greedy executive who had stolen from his own clients. Clara Voss was described as a shocked colleague. She gave a short, emotional statement expressing her sadness. Then she disappeared. The autopsy that changed everything. 2 weeks later, investigators received the autopsy results. Martin Hale had not died of natural causes. The report indicated poisoning, administered slowly over time, using a substance that mimicked the symptoms of illness. It wasn't something easily detected, and it required access, trust, someone close. The case was reclassified as a homicide, and suddenly the story changed. Following the money, while homicide detectives worked backward through Martin's final days, financial investigators followed the money. They found Clara's shell companies, then the offshore accounts, then the pattern. Every major transfer traced back to one source, Clara Voss. She hadn't just managed a fraud. She had engineered it. And Martin Hale hadn't been the mastermind. He had been the obstacle, the disappearance. By the time an arrest warrant was issued, Clara was gone. Her apartment was empty, her phone discarded, her passport unused. But that didn't mean she hadn't left the country. Authorities believed she had prepared multiple escape routes. She had always planned for this. An international manhunt began. Interpol issued a notice. Border agencies were alerted. Her face was broadcast across financial news networks worldwide. But Clara Voss was nowhere to be found. The final clue, 6 months later, a breakthrough came from an unexpected place. A small European bank flagged a dormant account that suddenly became active. The transaction was minor, but the account structure matched Clara's financial signature. Within days, authorities traced the activity to a coastal city known for its anonymity and transient population. When they arrived, Clara was gone again, but she had left something behind. A laptop, encrypted, what the files revealed. The data on the laptop confirmed everything. Detailed logs, transaction maps, notes outlining contingency plans, even a timeline labeled exit strategy, and one chilling document, a file titled Risk Mitigation MH. Inside were notes describing Martin Hale as a liability, references to monitoring his health, calculations of timing, no emotion, no hesitation, just planning. Aftermath. Clara Voss was never officially captured. Some believe she died under a false identity. Others think she still lives quietly somewhere, supported by money that was never recovered. What is certain is this: she stole over $120 million. She destroyed hundreds of lives financially, and she eliminated the one man who could expose her, not in a moment of rage, but with patience, precision, and calculation. Closing narration. Clara Voss wasn't loud. She wasn't reckless. She didn't fit the image of a criminal mastermind. She was organized, trusted, invisible, and that's what made her dangerous. Because in the world of financial crime, the most terrifying villains aren't the ones who break in. They're the ones you invite inside.